The awakening. It began not with thunder or war, but with silence, the kind of silence that hums before dawn when the world holds its breath, waiting for something to be born long before the age of machines and rockets, before the lights of cities drowned the stars. Humanity lived surrounded by shadows. We could not see, shadows that crept through breath and blood, stealing life without sound. The invisible enemy had many names: plague, fever, pestilence, but to those who suffered it was simply fear. Every cough a whisper of death, every touch a question mark carved into the skin. Whole towns fell silent, doors barred, windows sealed, prayers rising like smoke to gods who answered with nothing but wind. Centuries passed and the invisible enemy remained undefeated. Kings died, peasants vanished, doctors bled the sick with trembling hands, yet nothing stopped the march of death. It moved like fog through centuries until one day a spark flickered in the dark. It was the late 18th century when a country doctor named Edward Jenner watched something strange. The milkmaids in his village did not fall to smallpox. Their hands bore the gentle scars of cowpox, harmless yet powerful. He wondered, could one disease guard against another? In that question the course of humanity shifted. Jenner took the hand of a young boy, James Phipps. He made a cut, placed the essence of cowpox within it. Weeks later the boy was tested, exposed to smallpox, and nothing happened. No fever, no death, only silence. But this time it was the silence of victory, the first in history. That moment was small, almost invisible, like the enemy it conquered, yet it changed everything. It was the first vaccination, the first proof that knowledge could outmatch fear. Across Europe whispers spread of the miracle. The invisible enemy had met its match, and for the first time humanity began to dream of control. But the road ahead was long, darker than anyone imagined, because the enemy had more faces and the world was not ready to believe in invisible truths. Still, Jenner's discovery traveled across oceans, through empires and revolutions. Kings ignored him, priests condemned him, but mothers whispered his name over their children's cradles. Science had planted a seed and nothing could unmake it. The 19th century dawned with hope and fire. Laboratories rose from dust, the air filled with the scent of chemicals and the hum of curiosity. Louis Pasteur, a man with eyes like lightning, took up the fight. He saw the world not as chaos but as a pattern of life too small to see. He proved that disease was not a curse nor a punishment, but a living thing, an organism born in darkness, multiplying in silence. For centuries people had believed that sickness came from bad air or sin. Pasteur shattered that illusion. Under his lens, the invisible enemy took shape, writhing, moving, alive. The world changed that day. Invisible became visible and fear began to shrink. His experiments on rabies, anthrax, cholera turned science into salvation, but it was not without cost. The people called him mad, politicians mocked him, priests warned that he played God, yet Pasteur persisted because he knew the enemy was real and the war was far from over. As his vaccine spread across nations, death began to retreat, step by step, like a storm losing its power. But the battle left scars. The invisible enemy adapted, evolved, found new ways to survive, and once again humanity would be tested. Cities grew, machines roared, smoke filled the skies. The modern world was born, and with it new diseases, new wars, new silence in crowded streets. Germs traveled faster than whispers. Soldiers fell not from bullets but from infection. Trenches became breeding grounds of death. The First World War raged not only on battlefields but in hospitals where nurses fought a war no one could see. In 1918 the Spanish flu came like a ghost. Millions died within months. Streets emptied, trains stopped. The invisible enemy had returned stronger than before, yet in the chaos scientists remembered Jenner, remembered Pasteur. Remy M. Baird, the power of a single drop of knowledge. Humanity fought back. Microscopes replaced swords. Laboratories became fortresses, and once again light pierced the darkness. Through the century that followed, one vaccine became many: smallpox, diphtheria, polio, measles, each discovery another victory. Each needle another shield, but the enemy never vanished. It waited, watching, evolving, hiding in the breath of newborns, in the dust of forgotten cities, in the blood of explorers who reached the edges of jungles and deserts. Still humanity refused to kneel, because once a species learns it can fight the unseen, it never stops fighting. That truth became our greatest weapon. Knowledge became faith. Science became the new fire that burned against the night, and the invisible enemy began to fear us. The triumph. The 20th century opened with smoke and engines and hope humming in wires and hearts, but beneath the noise, the invisible enemy still moved, silent as thought, hidden in every breath, every wound, every drop of blood. It waited in hospitals, in battlefields, in the spaces between nations. The world had learned to build faster than it had learned to heal, but science had become a torch that would not go out, from the quiet halls of universities to jungle clinics where light bulbs flickered in the night. The war against the unseen was everywhere. Jonas Salk, a man with gentle eyes and relentless patience, stood before a disease that had stolen childhood itself. Polio. It came without warning, turning laughter into silence, play into paralysis. It crept through summers like a shadow on the sun. Parents watched helpless while children slipped into iron lungs. Salk worked for years through failure and doubt, through nights when the world seemed made of glass, ready to break. And then one day in 1955, the news spread like dawn across the planet. There was a vaccine and it worked. The invisible enemy had lost another fortress. Crowds gathered outside hospitals, church bells rang. The sound of faith, not in miracles but in human minds. Salk refused to patent his creation. When asked who owned the vaccine, he said, "Can you patent the sun?" That moment became legend, a symbol that knowledge belongs to everyone. And once again humanity rose a little higher, but the war was not finished. In the jungles of Africa, in the slums of Asia, new threats were being born, diseases with names no one yet knew, viruses carried by insects, animals, travelers. The enemy was learning faster, adapting, changing shape. Every victory created a new battlefield. The second half of the century became an age of collaboration. Scientists who once competed now stood side by side, sharing data, sharing dreams. The World Health Organization launched an impossible mission: eradicate smallpox, the oldest killer of them all. Teams carried coolers of vaccine across deserts and mountains, through war zones and storms. They followed rumors of outbreaks like detectives chasing ghosts in villages. Without electricity, they stored hope on blocks of ice. Every child vaccinated was another heartbeat added to humanity. The campaign lasted over a decade, and in 1980, the announcement echoed across the globe: smallpox was gone, erased from nature. For the first time in all of history, humanity had completely destroyed a disease. The invisible enemy had been cornered, forced into memory. That day, the planet learned what unity could do, but as one door closed, another opened. The 20th century ended with whispers of a new threat, HIV. The virus moved differently, slow, patient, invisible in ways science had never seen. It shattered illusions, spread not only through blood but through fear, prejudice, ignorance. Once again humanity faced not just biology but itself. Yet even in that darkness, hope lived. Researchers from every continent fought to understand the code of death inside a drop of blood. They built medicines that turned fatal diagnosis into lifelong battles, but survivable ones. They turned despair into discipline. They refused to surrender. By the time the century ended, humanity had changed. We no longer waited for miracles, we built them ourselves. The new century arrived not with peace, but with promise. Computers glowed in every laboratory. Data traveled faster than ships ever could. The invisible enemy now lived inside numbers, genomes, sequences, patterns of code hidden inside life itself, and scientists became translators of the microscopic world. They could read what once was mystery, they could edit what once was fate. In these digital temples of glass and light, humanity prepared for whatever came next, but the enemy never sleeps. It changed again. It crossed from forest to city, from animal to human in a single breath. In The year 2020, the silence returned, streets empty, skies cleared, borders closed, the world held its breath. The invisible enemy had found a new form, a crown of spikes that circled the earth without an army, without a flag, without mercy. COVID-19, it swept through nations like wind through fire, and for the first time the entire planet faced the same shadow at the same moment. Yet even as hospitals overflowed, even as fear filled the air, something else began to rise. Scientists working through nights that never ended, algorithms racing faster than panic, laboratories linked across oceans, data shared in seconds that once took years. Within months, humanity achieved what once would have taken decades, a vaccine born from knowledge stored inside code, not from luck, but from everything learned across centuries. From Jenner to Pasteur to Salk, every discovery had led to this one breathless point where millions waited for a cure. Unseen heroes in masks and microscopes carried the weight of the world on their shoulders. They were not soldiers, but they fought a war each day with pipettes and hope in their hands. And when the first dose was given, a quiet victory spread like sunrise across screens and cities and hearts. The invisible enemy trembled again because it had met something stronger than fear. It had met memory, the memory of centuries of struggle, of minds refusing to kneel, the memory encoded not in DNA but in will. The war had never truly been against disease, it had always been against ignorance, and every child vaccinated, every life saved, was proof that light can be built one mind at a time. As the months passed and the world reopened, people stepped into the sun, cautious, scarred, changed. They understood now that humanity is not defined by the enemies it faces, but by the unity it finds in fighting them. In that realization, the story of vaccines became more than science, it became the anthem of survival, a reminder that the smallest drop can hold the greatest power, that courage can be measured in milliliters and dreams can travel inside syringes. In classrooms and clinics, the next generation watched, learned, prepared. The invisible enemy would return in new forms, but they would be ready, because once you have seen the unseen, you never stop looking. The battle continues, but the war has changed. It is no longer one of fear but of vigilance, no longer of superstition but of understanding. And somewhere deep inside the hum of machines, in the glow of screens, the voice of humanity speaks softly to the darkness. We are still here, we are still learning, and we will not fall silent again. The war against the invisible enemy never truly ends, it only changes its shape and its soldiers, but each generation stands taller because of the ones who came before in the laboratories of the future. Children who once feared needles now build machines that craft vaccines in second, strands of RNA glowing like living light. The boundary between medicine and miracle grows thin, yet the core remains the same: courage, curiosity, compassion, the three forces that no virus can defeat. The story of humanity's fight is not written in victories alone, it is written in the moments we refused to give up. The nurses who stayed when hospitals fell quiet, the doctors who worked until their hands shook, the researchers who stared into microscopes until dawn, searching for a pattern hidden inside chaos. Every act of endurance, another page in the book of survival. The invisible enemy may have no face, but it has taught us who we are. It has forced us to look at one another and see not strangers but reflections. Every outbreak, every cure, every saved life is a thread in a single fabric that stretches across centuries, from a small English village where a doctor scratched a boy's arm with cowpox to the global networks that can map a virus before it reaches a port, from candles burning in Pasteur's lab to satellites watching pandemics from orbit. The same light continues, it flickers in every act of discovery, it burns brighter in every act of compassion, and it never dies. Even now the unseen world still hums beneath our feet, microbes moving, bacteria breathing, viruses dreaming of hosts, yet above them stands a species that learned to understand, to adapt, to defend. The invisible enemy is eternal, but so is our will to resist, and that is the true triumph, not eradication but Evolution, the understanding that fear can be turned into knowledge, pain into purpose, isolation into unity, because each vaccine, each breakthrough, each heartbeat saved says the same quiet truth: we are capable of more. We are the only species that can look into the dark and decide to build light. The next battles will not be easy: antibiotic resistance, new pathogens, new unknowns waiting in forests, ice and stars, but humanity carries its armor now, not of steel but of understanding, the map of our survival written in code and courage. As the centuries move forward, the invisible enemy will whisper again, but it will find a planet that listens, not with terror but with readiness, and somewhere in a classroom a young mind will remember the story of the ones who fought before, the ones who believed that knowledge could heal, that curiosity could save, that the smallest hand with a needle could hold the fate of millions. And in that moment the chain will not break, it will continue, because this is who we are, not conquerors of nature but partners in its endless dialogue. The invisible enemy taught us to see ourselves, to measure our strength not in weapons or walls but in wisdom, and when history looks back, it will not see a war against disease, it will see the awakening of a species that chose to understand instead of fear, that chose to create instead of destroy, that chose life over silence. And in that final truth, beneath the hum of machines, the laughter of children, and the pulse of a living world, one voice remains steady against the endless dark, whispering to every unseen shadow: we see you and we are not afraid.